today for the Phi-talk is joining us Gabriel Tseng from AI2 in the United States, and we met each other some years ago when I spent months in Canada, and we worked on a project together at Mila. And then Gabriel kind of continued the work of building foundation models for Earth observation data. And so now today he's gonna present about that, both their development and some hopefully interesting stuff about deploying those in operational settings. So yeah, with that, I leave the word to you, Gabriel.
All right, thanks, Ruben. Cool. I actually can't see my screen on this slides thing, so if the screen hasn't changed in a while, it should have if the slides haven't changed, so just let me know. But I'm going to assume that everything is right. So hello, I'm Gabby. Yeah, and I'll be talking about building and deploying pre-trained remote sensing models. Yeah, so by way of quick introduction, although Ruben did a very nice job. Yeah, I'm Gabby. I work at AI2. And my principal interests are making maps. I'm really interested in making agricultural land cover maps, so cropland and crop type maps. And I kind of cover the whole stack, and we'll hopefully do that in today's presentation as well. So that's like algorithmic development. How can you make good agricultural land cover maps when you don't have that many labels, but also making the maps and then also making the maps useful. And sometimes that means I get to go to the field. This photo is from Maui County, Hawaii, where we spent quite a few weeks talking to farmers, trying to get a sense for how we could build things that were useful for them. Yeah, I'll also say feel free to just interrupt with questions if things come up, but hopefully we'll have time at the end as well. So I'll talk about three things today. I'll talk about remote sensing data, although I will be quick on this part for this audience. I'll talk about pre-training models against remote sensing data. And then I'll talk about why we do this at all. So who are the users for whom this pre-training is interesting? Why do we bother doing it at all? So I'll start with the motivation, and this means talking about the users and the applications a little bit. So we're on the same page. I'll quickly define what I think about when I think about a remote sensing foundation model. What we have here is a model that ingests a range of remote sensing inputs, optical, radar, derived products like topography, and then it yields one of two things, either a vector, which can get passed to some simple classifier, or a set of weights, which can be end-to-end fine-tuned. And then the goal is usually to make maps. So for instance, these are live fuel moisture content maps. They are a proxy for forest flammability. So returning to our users. Who are our users? Who are these pre-trained models useful to now? In my experience, I've encountered three kinds of users. The first are practitioners. So these are folks who are already using machine learning and remote sensing. They already have pipelines, they're already making maps, and often I found that they're interested in spatial or temporal generalization. So to motivate this a little bit, this is a map of soil samples with physical and hydraulic soil properties, and there's huge gaps in the data. So you can see, for instance, coverage in South America is way worse than in North America. There's a big gap in Central Africa, but collecting a soil sample requires going to the field, picking up some soil and taking it to a lab. So as a modeler who wants to make a digital soil map covering maybe the whole globe, I can't easily travel across the Amazon to get more samples to further my digital soil modeling effort. So some model which can demonstrate spatial generalization in this case, that's very attractive. Another kind of user is someone who's aiming to iterate quickly on a new project. So this might consist of making a map, given a handful of labels, and then scaling it up. So we have two examples here. On the left is the LFMC, the forest flammability maps that I was just talking about. This was actually something we were able to make in just a few days using a pre-trained model, in part because we were able to leverage labels, but in part because building a pre-trained model gives you a whole bunch of infrastructure, which is easy to leverage for downstream tasks. And I'll talk about a bit more about this later as well. But we're not the only, we're AI2 and previous collaborators like Ruben, we're not the only ones who have thought about this. So on the right is a blog post or an image from a blog post by Ben Strong over at the Earth Genome. And they've also found that as they've incorporated pre-trained models into their workflows, they've been able to really make maps much faster. And my third class of users, I also call explorers a little bit awkwardly. But these are folks who are not technical in the sense of being unfamiliar with remote sensing data, but they have a hunch basically that remote sensing data can help, and they would like to explore that hunch. But they don't want to spend lots of time learning about how to properly process SAR data and what to do with cloudy optical data. They would just like a vector that captures all of the information that is relevant for the remote sensing pixel at that space and time. So as an example, there are some folks at the Beery lab over at MIT, Sarah Beer's lab, and their technical expertise is in computer vision. So they build camera traps, they build detection algorithms for camera traps, and they have a hypothesis that knowing information captured by remote sensing data is helpful for this camera trap detection algorithm. But as I said, this is just a hypothesis. They don't want to spend tons of time looking up how to process SAR data. And so having a vector that captures this, that's really helpful. And they can just incorporate it into their modeling. Okay, so we have our three kinds of users, these practitioners, explorers who are looking to quickly iterate on a new project, and then explorers who are basically trying to test out whether remote sensing data is appropriate for their applications. What needs do they have? Practitioners have three kinds of needs. The first is that these models need to easily fit into complex pipelines. So to illustrate this a little bit, this is the workflow for World Serial. Because they've already got some pipeline that processes remote sensing data and uses it to train a machine learning algorithm, they're not going to rework this just to test out if our pre-trained model helps them fix their spatial and temporal generalization issues. So here, what I've highlighted in red, this little box in the bottom, this is the feature extractor. So this is basically the machine learning part of their pipeline. It's actually a relatively small part of their overall pipeline. And so if we want to fit their needs, we need to also fit into their pipelines. A little bit related to this, if we're building foundation models, which we're going to claim are relatively general for most remote sensing use cases, then we actually need to fit into these remote sensing use cases. So World Serial is not the only large-scale mapping effort. Here I've listed out a handful more. And what I want to highlight in this table is that different remote sensing projects, different mapping efforts, for good reason, process remote sensing data differently. So some might process it as pixel time series, others as multi-time step imagery, others as single time step imagery, and others still will process it in multiple ways. So Global Plastic Watch, for instance, first looks at data as a pixel time series and then as single time step imagery. So if we're going to build a general model, then we need to be able to generally ingest all of these kinds of views of remote sensing data. And finally, we need to do why they're like what it says on the tin. We need to demonstrate this temporal and geographic generalization. For these explorers, the needs are a little bit different. The first thing that these models need to do is be accessible. So this means computationally and technically cheap to explore. This is because we're often testing hypotheses. We're not sure what it's going to look like, and we don't want to waste a whole bunch of time just like reading docs and getting up to date speed with how to use these models. So two examples that do this well are mosaics and then also the Earth Genome Viewer. And then we also need to model a wide range of input sensors. So this table is from soils grids. It's kind of deliberately small, but the point is that soils grids look which remote sensing covariates were helpful to model soils, and it's a lot of them, it turns out. What I've highlighted in green are those that people coming from just a machine learning background might think about. So this is optical data, but there's a whole host of others that are important to model soils. And it's not just soils. So this was some work from Krishna Rao at Stanford looking at LFMC, which inputs are important to model LFMC. And again, it's many more than just SAR data, the microwave data. Okay, so these are my users. These are their needs. I think that now we can start thinking about what it looks like to pre-train models against remote sensing data in a way that satisfies the needs of these users. So yes, I really want to build things that are useful for people. So let's keep these needs top of mind as we think about what is going to be required of our remote sensing model and then how we'll actually build it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is flexibly leverage a wide range of available remote sensing products. As I said, we don't know a priori which remote sensing products are going to be important for a downstream task. So let's not try and eliminate any to begin with. So we'll use lots of different sensors and also downstream products such as dynamic world. We want to train on globally sampled data. Like one of the really nice things about remote sensing compared to perhaps other domains, such as, for instance, natural imagery, so we can fully model our distribution. So we have no excuses for being surprised at downstream time. Oh, interesting. Did parts of this slide not load? Let's try reloading it. Okay. In any case, this last slide is is this working for you guys? It's
no, same for us.
No, same for us.
Same here.
Okay, interesting. Sorry. Anyway, this last slide, the point is that the model needs to be optionally small. I need to, like, if I'm running inference at global scale, like world serial or soils grids, then I'm running inference over billions of pixels. This means I can't afford to have a really expensive model at inference time. And to make this concrete, what I had on this slide was a screenshot from Christoph Van Trick's blog post over at World Serial when they were benchmarking different algorithms for the World Serial modeling effort. Performance of the algorithm, which is to say the compute cost, was one of their principal considerations. And so it's important that this is another requirement that our model meets. Okay, so as Ruben mentioned, and I'm assuming this slide has loaded, I've developed a handful of models now, and these needs and requirements, these have guided all of my research into these pre-trained models. Today, I'm going to talk about the most recent one that I've worked on, OlmoEarth, which was a huge team effort with the team over at AI2. I was only one of many contributors to this work. Okay, one of the reasons that I'm especially keen to talk about OlmoEarth is because it's more than just a set of weights. So we talked about accessibility being a really important component of these models. And for this reason, for many users, it's not enough to just release a model or a set of weights. They need a path to take this model, bring their labels, and then generate wall-to-wall maps, and perhaps even generate useful insights from these wall-to-wall maps. So over at OlmoEarth at AI2, we've tried really hard to meet this need, building not just a model, but also a platform which makes it easy to do this, go from labels to a wall-to-wall map. The OlmoEarth platform is built on top of the OlmoEarth model. So the OlmoEarth model is a multimodal, multi-temporal remote sensing pre-trained model. So one of the nice features of this model, just like Presto and Galileo, the other two models I worked on, is that OlmoEarth is flexible in what inputs it ingests. So it can process a subset of input modalities and also a varying number of time steps. And this means that you can tailor it based on your need. So this is kind of the obligatory results slide. We ran like lots of benchmarks to evaluate OlmoEarth. Actually, we ran more than, I think, like I thought Galileo was thorough when I was doing the benchmarking for this, and this for OlmoEarth we did much more. So we ran 53 evaluations. We covered lots of modalities, input shapes, geographies, and the thing that I'm most proud of for this particular set of evaluations is that we use the traditional research benchmarks. So the kind of benchmarks you might have seen in papers like Eurosat, but from day one we also incorporated partner tasks. And what are those? Those are tasks which reflect the real needs of people on the ground. So partners that we were already working with, they were telling us, if you do well here, that's really useful for us. So on nearly all of these 53 evaluations, OlmoEarth is the first or second best. It's best overall, and also it defines a Pareto frontier of performance against these tasks, against compute costs, which is also really nice. Okay, so how do we train a state-of-the-art remote sensing model? I'll start with a data set. As I mentioned, one of the really nice things about remote sensing is that we can fully model our distribution. So we have no excuses for being surprised. So for OlmoEarth, we sampled 300,000 training points globally, sampling a diversity of OpenStreetMap classes. So for each of these points, we pulled satellite observations in the form of Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, and Landsat, and we coupled this with high-quality maps, world cover, world serial, etc. And these high-quality maps will be weak labels during training. Given this data set, what does training look like? So I'll start with a high-level diagram. This is what we're looking at now. For those of you who are familiar with self-supervised learning, this diagram should look really familiar. We basically have a master reconstruction approach. So let's take our Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, and Landsat. That defines our input X. We project it into token space, and then we randomly mask out bits of the input. And then we have some encoder-decoder model that is trained to recover what was masked out. So in addition, we also have these maps, and these are also projected into the token dimensions and then used as a weak signal during training. So we never do pure reconstruction. We always use a contrastive loss. So that's not MAE, that's more like the latent MIM approach, and we just found empirically that this performed much better. Okay, I will now go into a little more detail. I'll try and go slowly because there's a lot going on in this slide. Okay, so what I show here is kind of like a general overview of how self-supervised learning works for nearly any remote sensing model and many other domains besides. So I'll try and now discuss what makes OlmoEarth a little bit unique and what makes the training recipe interesting, and why I think it does well. So the first thing to note is that just like latent MIM or JEPA, all of our learning happens in the token space. So we project our targets into the token space too. And this allows us to use a contrastive loss instead of a reconstructive loss like MAE, like I just mentioned. So other folks, especially in computer vision, have already explored this and found that this works better. But there are two unique things here from the perspective of OlmoEarth. The first is that our target projection is a frozen random projection. So we don't update it via EMA like you might do in a JEPA setup. So we found that this helped with the stability without at all penalizing performance. We still get really good performance. And we also noticed early on that our model was like trivially separating modalities in the contrastive loss. So you can imagine you have this whole bunch of tokens, and you're going to do a contrastive loss between them. But some tokens are from Sentinel-1, some are from Sentinel-2, others are from Landsat. And so our token contrastive loss is applied per modality. So this makes the task a little bit harder because your model has to discriminate between tokens within the same modality, but making the task harder in this way improved downstream performance. Second, we also apply something that we call an instance contrastive loss. So you'll see here that there are two views that we construct. So you can imagine we get a batch of data, and for every batch, we're actually going to apply this random masking twice. And so that's what defines view 1 and view 2 in this diagram. And then for each view, we pool the unmasked tokens. Again, we apply contrastive loss. Here, the positive is going to be the same sample, but with from the different view. And the negatives are all the other samples in the batch. The motivation here actually was to teach the model to pool the tokens well, because we're going to be doing this for downstream tasks. But we also found that it really helped with stability during pre-training. So that is an overview of how we train OlmoEarth, but there's many more ablations and results in the technical report. And then, we tried really hard to make everything as open as possible. So the weights, the code, the data set, all of this is available on Hugging Face or GitHub. And again, it was really a team effort. In addition to the folks working on the modeling directly, we had loads of support from other teams within AI2. Okay, so now I've talked about the modeling. I'll talk about some interesting applications. So what does it look like to deploy these models in the real world? So a really interesting deployment that we worked on, not with OlmoEarth, actually with Presto, an earlier model. And perhaps you'll see why it's an earlier model as I go through these slides. These deployments can really take time. So this is work that we did with World Serial, and actually that Ruben was also involved with. World Serial, for those of you who don't know, is a global cropland and crop type mapping effort. They're principally interested in cereals, as the name suggests, but actually they're currently mapping a whole host of other crops as well. And they do this at global scale. Crop maps are really important. Just to quickly motivate this even more, an example of, well, first of all, crop maps are like the foundational layer for all sorts of other agricultural insights that you might build on top of it. So it's really important for yield estimation to understand like what the total production within a region is of food, what the food security of a region is. And this can really motivate the flow of aid. And so, for instance, understanding the food security of a region, which is, again, done on top of crop maps, can move billions of dollars of food aid and can prevent a bad drought from becoming a humanitarian catastrophe. Okay, so we worked alongside the World Serial team to basically integrate Presto into their modeling framework. And there are a few lessons that we learned along the way that I'll share here. The first is that users, as I've said already a few times, might have existing frameworks we need to fit within. So at a very high level, this is what World Serial's prediction pipeline looked like before we got involved. They had experts define a whole bunch of expert features from remote sensing data. These might be like the peak value of the NDVI curve, things like this. These features would all be passed through to a CatBoost classifier, and they would make their predictions. When we introduced Presto, we originally thought about just end-to-end replacing this. But originally, the CatBoost classifier was also making like a few basically business decisions, and they didn't want to eliminate that entirely. And so in the end, what we did is just replace these expert features with Presto features in a frozen manner. And so it's really seamlessly fitting into this diagram that I showed earlier. The second lesson we learned is that users might require many, many tests to build comfort in our model. So even though this table only shows what looks like not that many numbers, it took many iterations for the World Serial team to be comfortable that when they introduced Presto and replaced their expert features, they weren't going to see a regression, first of all. And second of all, that it was actually going to, as I said, do what it says on the tin. So exhibit spatial and temporal generalization. So what we have here is 3 different splits that we evaluated with the World Serial team. A random split, so this is just, is the raw performance better? A spatial split and a temporal split. And so this is asking, are we seeing better temporal and spatial generalization? And then again, there were iterations to define these spatial splits. Like, as you can imagine, if we have incomplete data, it's hard to do a held out spatial split. But so we would say, okay, we have data, for instance, in Argentina, and this is similar to other places where we don't have data. So if we hold it out and see how we do there, then we can be educated about how we'll do the places where we don't have labels. And then another big lesson we learned is that qualitative, actually just going back here, this is another really nice thing about having a relatively efficient model. If Presto, Presto is a relatively lightweight model, and if it had been really expensive to run, all of these iterations would have been much more expensive. But instead, it was trivial for us to continually retrain the model and get different results as we built confidence alongside the World Serial team. Yeah, and then a third lesson is that qualitative evaluations are important too. So here, these are, we don't have labels everywhere. So alongside the World Serial team, we define chips all over the planet. And we would then just run inference over those chips and see what the map outputs look like compared to things that we could interpret, such as NDVI values. And so these chips are from models trained using a random split. And we compared it to obviously the existing output of the model, these expert features. So that's World Serial V1. There's a bit of smoothing on the expert features, so a bit of post-processing. That's why it looks so much coarser here. But basically, in this case, this is Belgium, where the World Serial team was confident the model did well. They didn't want to see a regression. And the fourth lesson we learned is that we tried pretty hard to make Presto easy to access. You know, we had it could be easily loaded from a Python package. There was a single file version for integration into other applications. The model weights, the model is small, so we could store the weights on Git. It was 3 megabytes. We had a notebook demonstrating fine tuning in 6 minutes on an old MacBook Pro. And even in spite of this, it was really important for us to co-develop alongside the World Serial team, and then eventually give them the confidence to like be off to the races. And in the last few months, I haven't touched this at all. It's been entirely World Serial, so that's been really cool. So these are lessons that we learned from a big deployment that we did with Presto in World Serial, and there are also lessons that we tried to take over to this OlmoEarth platform that I was just describing earlier. So we are trying to empower users in as hands-off a way as we can, although we recognize that often we'll have to be involved as well in many ways, along an end-to-end mapping workflow. And so what does the OlmoEarth platform do? Well, the first thing it does is it manages labeling and data acquisition. So the OlmoEarth Studio contains labeling capabilities. It's being used by a handful of different labeling organizations at relatively large scale now with success. And then it can also just ingest labels directly in a GeoJSON. And then they can also be reviewed, which is always nice. Once you have the labels, you can do end-to-end fine-tuning within the platform. So there's quite a bit of flexibility here. If you're a technical user, we're just building a YAML with lots of configuration options, so you have full control. But if you're not a technical user, we have strong opinions about what a relatively good way to fine-tune OlmoEarth is. Again, this is a nice thing about building everything around a unified model, is that you can define these strong opinions, and you can just walk through a GUI to basically fill out that YAML. And then you get some 1dB logs and you get a fine-tuned model. Yes, and then finally, once you have that fine-tuned model, we can run it over arbitrarily large areas. And so this is, I often find where people have the most trouble when they're trying is how do I process like huge quantities of Sentinel-2 data and turn them into maps? Well, that's something that the OlmoEarth team has basically handled. And so it's highly parallelized, which means we can do lots of big areas. We have a viewer so that you can inspect the results, and then you can also easily download them into whatever viewing tool you like, in this example, QGIS, and take a look there. Yes, so to summarize, building and deploying pre-trained models is interesting and sometimes useful. And in this presentation, I mostly talked about OlmoEarth, a state-of-the-art model, backed by an end-to-end platform designed with users in mind and being used now for mapping efforts all around the planet. And there are a whole bunch of links there if that is useful or interesting. I think we have quite a bit of time for questions now, if folks have thoughts or questions or feedback.
Okay, thank you so much. So I would say, if there are any questions from Phi-Lab directly, Ruben, you can manage them. Otherwise, people online, feel free to unmute yourself or write in the chat, and we have some time for questions.
Nice. Yeah, thank you very much, Gabby, for the super interesting talk. Does someone have questions here? Yep. Yeah. Valerio?
Yeah. Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hello, Valerio.
No, yeah, my question is just basically about how many times did you have to iterate dataset, and which is on the pre-training dataset, I mean, sorry, to build your OlmoEarth, in the sense that how many times did you, let's say, change your mind, and how many times did you have to change how many modalities you want to have, and then based on the output of the model, how many times did you have to come back to the dataset and reprocess them, and so on. So all these kind of, let's say, preprocessing related steps about the pre-training dataset. I hope that this is clear, but yeah, you can really answer. It's a very open question, so any kind of tip would be very useful. Thanks.
Okay, I will try and time bound because I have many thoughts about the pre-training data set and the data set in general. So I guess there are multiple dimensions to the data set.
You were freezing for a second.
Am I back? Is everything okay?
Thanks, ESA hardware. So we were freezing for a second.
Yes, I heard everything. Can you still hear me?
Yes, now we're back. Thank you. So yeah,
Okay, cool.
If you could quickly repeat, that would be nice. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, I'll try and keep this relatively brief. I have many thoughts about the pre-training data set. So I guess there are 3 dimensions. All right, I'll talk about 3 dimensions specifically. The first is how you sample the data set. We did iterate on this. So we tried sampling for diversity using world cover, just sampling different OSM classes and doing random sampling. So this was empirical to figure out which was best. In terms of the modalities, the input modalities, so actually Galileo, which was a previous work, supported far more input modalities than OlmoEarth does. And one of the reasons that we have fewer modalities that are supported in OlmoEarth is because we're trying really hard to make sure that every design decision we make now is motivated by a partner need. And so far, we haven't really had partners come to us requiring other modalities, or we haven't had compelling evidence of tasks that require other modalities. And so this is actually something we're actively seeking out. So we're trying to say, okay, do you have a task that like really compellingly requires weather? Because this has not been the case for any of the partners that we've worked with so far. And if you do, then we'll add weather. So we're trying to make sure the development of additional modalities is really motivated by what partners need. The other advantage of doing it in this way is that if a partner has a need, usually they have a benchmark, and we can say, okay, we're going to add weather, but we'll do it in a way that's intelligent and is actually, making progress against your benchmark instead of just chucking in there for the sake of chucking it in there. Yes, so those are two things, the sampling and the modalities. The third is the data set size. Yeah, and this is also kind of an area of exploration. So far we've used the biggest data set size that we can, or that we were like, okay, but we actually have seen a plateau. So we're seeing that we can reduce the size of the data set without hurting the performance of the model. And this is kind of an active area of exploration for us over at the team, is understanding this better. And is it, well, there are many reasons why this could be the case. It could be a limitation of the benchmarks. It could be a limitation of the remote sensing data modalities. And it could just be that actually you don't need that much information to model like the world using these pre-trained models. And all three of those would be interesting. And these are things that we're all exploring, but we don't have answers for just yet. I hope that answers your question, Valerio.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
To follow quickly up on that, I don't know, maybe I missed it, maybe you answered, but in the process of developing the model, did you redo the pre-training data set at some point, either the export or the processing, or aside from, okay, as you said, comparing between random sampling and sampling according to OpenStreetMap classes?
Yeah, so the data set is built on top of a tool called RSLearn. It was developed principally by Fabian, who's an engineer over at AI2, but now many people are working on it. And basically, the short of it is that the way that the data set is saved means that we never had to restart from scratch. It's quite easy to be additive or substitutive in how you manage the data set. So we never had to restart it from scratch, but we did iterate on it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does someone else have a question here? Okay, then I will ask you a quick question. We just had a meeting earlier today with other people involved in ESA missions who are interested in learning about embeddings, of course, as it's has been recently kind of a hot topic, which have the benefit, of course, that you can like pre-compute them and make them available somewhere and download them as if they were like a Neo product, and then use them as input for whatever model. And the approach that you are taking is with your platform slightly more, or it seems to slightly more go towards fine-tuning the model, which maybe is motivated by performance, but also by other things. Could you comment on that or give some insight? Are you also planning to support make it really easy for people to download pre-computed embeddings, or do you really stick by the fine-tuning setup? And
Yep, that's a great question. So we are exploring embeddings in that we intend to release embeddings. The challenge is it's really hard to do them right. So for instance, should they be annualized? Should they cover agricultural seasons? Should they cover some other things? If they're annualized, like how are you dealing with the temporal dimension at all? Do you just pool over the temporal? Anyway, sorry, these are just questions that we're trying to answer. But the short of it is we are thinking about embeddings. They are really, really nice for accessibility. But yeah, they are complicated in all of these ways. How do you update them when you have new captures? Many people care a lot about the recency of the embeddings or being able to use them for change detection. And all of these throw wrenches into things. How can we stand by the quality of the embeddings? Like what kind of benchmarks can we say? If we release the embeddings, then we can say they're useful for these tasks and not useful for these tasks. These are all things we want to do alongside a release. We don't just want to throw out a whole bunch of like, I don't know what, arrays or geotiffs somewhere online and have people do whatever with them. So that's one of the reasons that we haven't released them yet. But yeah, secondly, if you're going to be making maps and trying to make really good maps, then maybe you're spending a huge effort on labeling and trying to get the best labels possible. then we do see such a huge boost from fine-tuning the models that kind of one of the stances that we have is that if you're actually going to be doing things in a production situation, if you're going to be making high quality maps, then you definitely should be fine-tuning.
Okay. Thanks for the interesting answer. Does someone else have a question here or in the chat? There was a question. Ali. Sorry, I cannot see your name entirely here. Ali Reza.
Yeah,
Please.
sorry. Do you hear me now? I have to just only.
I can.
Thank you, Gabriel, for the presentation. Actually, I have just somehow a related question to the a question that is related to the previous question. So I see in your paper about Presto, you have mentioned that the inputs are Sentinel-2, Sentinel-1, precipitation, dynamic forward, and other stuff. So if we want to get the embeddings out of the Presto network, should we also prepare exactly the same input features to your model, or we can adjust it maybe if we don't have available elevation data set, or just we want to work only on time series of Sentinel-2? Is it also available to get access to the embeddings?
Yes. So you with all three models, Presto, Galileo, and OlmoEarth, you can just pass a subset and get vector representations that are usually good. But as I said, we're trying hard to make sure that we can evaluate that and make that answer more quantitative. But having said that, yeah, this is one of the challenges with Presto and Galileo, which are ultimately just a set of weights that are released versus OlmoEarth, is that you do need to process it in the right way. We tried to make the documentation clear on how to do that. And if you're using Google Earth Engine, then it actually should be relatively easy to get data out in the same way. But that is not a decision or a thing you need to reason about with OlmoEarth if you use the platform, because we manage that all for you.
Very nice. Does someone have another question online, perhaps, or in person? Are you planning on integrating other modalities in the next version? Do you already have an idea about it? For example, SAR modalities?
We have Sentinel-1,
Yes.
and then for the others, it's really motivated, as I said, by the use cases. So if we have a partner that says this use case is important for us, or this modality is critical or important to our use case, then for sure we will explore it. But as I said, we're a little bit bottlenecked by the benchmarks here, but by the evaluation data sets against which we can be confident that we're doing things in the right way. Yeah. And just to answer one of the questions in the chats from Gijs, G-I-J-S, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. We do actually benchmark against OlmoEarth. So it's not in the main part of the paper, but it is in the appendix. We benchmark against OlmoEarth. Kind of the takeaway is that the frozen embeddings are competitive with OlmoEarth. The fine-tuned model blows it out of the water. And this is one of the nice things about having an open model. Presto, Galileo, OlmoEarth, all of them are open weights that you can either use as embeddings or fine-tune if you have a little bit of extra compute. Whereas with OlmoEarth, you're stuck with the embeddings, which sometimes is fine. But if you're really looking for performance, you get a big boost from fine-tuning. I hope that answered your question.
Very nice. Yeah. Then if no one has another question, I think we can more or less round off and let you get back to enjoying your holidays. So yeah, thank you very much, Gabi, for the super interesting talk and for answering the questions. So let's have another small round of applause.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening in. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm reachable by email. I'm sure Ruben has all of my information, so feel free to just follow up if you have any other questions or things that pop up, or if you want to take these models for a spin and you're having trouble. So.
Super nice. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Have a nice
Happy
holiday.
Wednesday, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for attending.